Welcome to the Labour Leadership Hustings 2020.
Hello and welcome to Liverpool. I'm Liam Thorpe, I'm the political editor of the Liverpool Echo, and most of you probably know me from arguing with me on Twitter, including my dad, who was here somewhere. He's the worst for it, actually. I think it's highly appropriate that we're starting this first crucial leadership hustings in Liverpool, because, as we know, Liverpool does things its own way, and whereas the party may have had some pretty difficult defeats in former strongholds, Liverpool returned 5 Labour MPs with strong majorities. I spend a lot of my life reporting on the problems in this city and the issues that vulnerable people face, whether it's through issues of universal credit, through the staggering cuts that the austerity agenda has done to Liverpool Council, 436 million in the last 10 years. And it's hard to think of a city that wants a Labour government more, and it's hard to think of a city that needs a Labour government more than Liverpool. So it's great that we're starting here today, and as long as we can keep the Liverpool-Everton rivalry out of it, I think we'll be fine. No mention of football today, guys, all right? Less of that sort of thing, all right? Security... No, it is. See, I shouldn't have even mentioned it, really. We've got them started. Right, security, we know where to watch now, don't we? Go on. We have myself, Jenny Formby, and other Labour characters who you will all know quite well, have been selecting from the thousands of questions that you guys have fired us, and I knew there would be some amazing questions, I knew there'd be some slightly odd questions as well, and we have tried to select them on the broadest range of issues that we think that you guys care about the most. So I'll just run through how things are going to work today. So, this is the first opportunity for candidates to answer questions on the issues that matter most to Labour voters, members and supporters. The aim of these guidelines is to ensure that the events are fair to all the candidates who are here today. Earlier on in the green room, I went through all of the questions you have submitted, and we sort of agreed on a broad range of topics. Each candidate will have just 40 seconds to answer each question. When I mentioned this to the guys earlier, there was a few faces pulled. We've got stop clocks here because we've combined it into a sort of Crystal Maze meets Labour Leadership Hustings kind of event. So just to spice things up a bit. So at 40 questions, we will have to say to ask people to stop and to move on. I'll be putting the questions to the candidates in order, starting with Rebecca, moving on to Jess, Emily, Lisa and Keir, and then the next question will start at Jess and move back that way, so everyone gets a chance to be first. Each question will be asked to every candidate, and when the candidates come out, we will not have opening statements, but we will just move straight to the questions once I've stopped blathering on with myself. No candidates will be permitted to interrupt each other or heckle each other, but if they do want to come back on things, then I'm certainly happy for us to have a bit of back and forth. But I want everyone to get on. I want us all to be able to go through a pint after. I know some great boozers around here that we can all get involved with from my research. Obviously, we want people to show their support, but too much clapping and whooping, and we'll have to just calm everything down because we need to move on. So that is the bit I'm really looking forward to of all of it. And if we break out into "You'll Never Walk Alone," then I'm just going to leave. All right? So without much further ado, let's get started. So, Rebecca, starting with you and then moving along, how would you unite the Labour Party and put a stop to factionalism?
I think we have to be honest with ourselves that over the last 4 years, we haven't been united as a party, and united parties win elections and disunited parties don't. And it's not acceptable for any of our members to call other members a cult. It's not acceptable for any of our members to tell people to F off and go and join the Tories. And we've got to recognise that the whole point of the Labour Party was that it was established to bring together all views across the centre-left of politics to become a credible force to keep the Tories out of power. And yes, we'll disagree, but we have those disagreements in private. And once we've agreed our position, we unify, we rebuild, and we win. That's the only way to keep the Tories out of power, and I know that we can do that.
No pressure, guys, but that is a very good start to a politician answering a question in just 40 seconds, which it's really set the standard. So, Jessica, the same to you. How do we unite the party and put a stop to factionalism?
I would agree with what Becky has said about the name-calling, which has been horrendous for every single part of our movement. But any leader of the Labour Party is going to not have to do this on their own. They're going to have to build a broad team of people, not just within the Parliamentary Labour Party, but also putting it out to members. What we have found in the past few years is that sometimes the membership felt that they were not being included. In fact, that's been the case for a long time. This is about every single one of us seeking to act united and to work towards winning an election, because that is absolutely our common goal.
Brilliant. Thank you. I should have said earlier, actually, this question is from Sarah Treyers of the Liverpool Riverside CLP. And same question now to Emily, please. How would you unite the party and put a stop to factionalism?
We are the coalition on the left. We were created by working people in order to be in power and in order to be able to deliver for working people. Yes, we will always have our differences. Listen, the left always has its differences, but what unites us is much more than what divides us, and we have to stick together because that is our purpose. Our purpose is to make sure we are a united fighting force and we take it to the Tories. And every day that we spend in the media fighting each other is a day that we lose fighting the Tories. We have to keep our eye on the ball. We need to be in power. The country is crying out for an alternative government, and it will not happen unless we are united. We need to have a leader from the heart of the party who respects everyone and treats people properly.
And the same to you, Lisa.
Every fight that I've ever fought, whether it was getting children out of immigration detention or homeless teenagers off the streets of Soho, we've only won because we've built the broadest possible team and alliance. And that is as true for the Labour Party as anywhere else. Our breadth is what gives us reach into the country, means we can speak for very different parts of our coalition and hear what people are telling us. I love the energy and dynamism that's come into our party over recent years, and I love too the loyalty and experience of many of our activists who've gone out day after day door knocking for 20 years. It starts now. In this contest, we raise the bar, we defend one another, and we move forwards together.
This timekeeping's going well. Keir, how would you unite the fact that...
Look, we've had far too much division. I think the whole of the party wants to be united. They want to come together. So we have to end factionalism. Stop asking the question, which bit of the party are you from? And start saying, what are you saying? And what I saw in the election, I went to 44 constituencies, was big teams of Labour supporters out there drawing together, putting their differences aside. If we can do it for an election campaign, we can do it as a party. And I know that if we're going to do it, it has to be modelled from the top. I've run an organisation where I've changed values and culture. You have to model it from the top. And we need to draw the strength, the passion, the dedication of our commitment of our members together. We're unstoppable when we're united.
I've not had to tell anyone off yet, so I'm very pleased about this. Speaking about divisions, there's probably no more of a divisive issue really than Brexit right now, both in terms of the country and the party, perhaps. And Callum Taylor from Preston, he says it's clear that our country and our party are still divided over Brexit. How are you going to unite both of these issues? So we'll start with Jess this time.
Look, I think that we often talk about divisions in our country over Brexit as if everybody is at each other's throats, which is certainly how it felt in Westminster. But very rarely in my Leave constituency can people not find common ground about the things that they care about. Now, our coalition of Labour voters and Labour members has two very big hearts in this game. We have got to send that fight to Boris Johnson to make sure that in Grimsby he is delivering exactly what he promised on the side of a bus, at the same time as making sure that in our London seats people feel we are not going to turn away from Europe. I've had to stop because the time ran out.
I say none of us actually know what happens if they keep talking after the 40 seconds. I think a trapdoor might open, but we'll see. So can we move on to Emily, please, on the Brexit issue?
Let's not kid ourselves. We're going to be having to leave the European Union at the end of January, and Boris Johnson says he's going to get a deal by the end of 2020. He's not going to do that. He knows he's not going to do that, and everybody knows he's not going to do that. And frankly, I know, you know, that he doesn't care, and that what we're going to end up doing, we may well end up facing, is a no-deal Brexit, and we have to take the fight to that, because in the end, what unites all of us is that we have to look after jobs and the economy, because that is what we are about. And we cannot allow this reckless Prime Minister to simply believe that because he's wrapped himself in a lie and got through this general election with a great big majority, he can do whatever he likes with this country. We have to take the fight to him, and we have to make sure that he is accountable. You know, we need to have someone leading this fight who has frankly been on the right side all along.
Lisa?
I think we failed to get it right on Brexit because we accepted the Tory framing that this was a zero-sum game. And we airbrushed out of the conversation all the nuance and the complexity. My Leave voting constituents are no more racist little Englanders than my friends who voted Remain are liberal elitists. And we should never allow the Tories to do that, to divide us, young against old, citizen against migrant, north against south, town against city. We have got to raise our game. We are the ambitious party. We go out to the country, we make the argument, and we speak for both.
And the same on Brexit to you, Keir.
Look, Brexit has divided families, communities, and our party. And I think people are really fed up with it. And we've got to stop defining people by how they voted in June 2016 and move on from that. Europe tore the Tory party apart for 40 years. We can't now let Brexit tear our party apart for the next 10 or 20 years. So we need to come together. We know why we fought against Brexit, because it was Tory Brexit that would damage our communities and our country. But we are leaving at the end of this month, and the Leave Remain argument has to go when we leave, and we focus then on the future and on unity.
And finally, Rebecca, on this one.
We've got to be honest that our compromise solution on Brexit did not work and voters lost trust in us. Those who voted Leave thought that we were trying to overturn the result of the referendum, and many of those who voted Remain thought we weren't being robust enough. Now, we've got to recognise that Brexit will happen, and our job now is to show a clear vision of what our country will look like beyond Brexit, what our relationship with the EU will look like, and what our place in the world is going to be. And that has to be built around our vision for a democratic economy that shares power with the people who need it. The fact is that people talked about power being centralised in Brussels, rules being made there, but Westminster is no different, and that's why we need to see a democratic revolution.
Now, I should have added that in an exciting twist to the whole timing rules, I'm occasionally allowed to step in with a follow-up question, but we still have to stick to the 40-second rule. What I wanted to ask on behalf of a city like Liverpool, which has relied on European Union funding for such a long time, that kind of money has ridden to the rescue of a city that's been badly damaged by government policies, both more recently and in the 1980s. There'll be a lot of people who are very worried about what's going to happen and to a city like this. What kind of reassurances can you guys give that in a post-Brexit world, places like Liverpool will have the money and the funding and the support that they need? I guess we should start with Jess again on this one. Yeah.
I mean, the truth is that I can give no reassurance for the next 4 years because Boris Johnson has a majority of 80, and that is incredibly difficult because what he will almost certainly try and do is throw bits of money to places where he thinks people might vote for him, and undoubtedly an argument for places like Liverpool, like the place where I live in Birmingham, will have to be made incredibly strongly about where he is failing, and we need to do that with heart, and we need to get that message through to the country, because at the moment they are talking about whether a bell will ring We are up against a war that we are currently not fit to fight against Boris Johnson.
Emily, what are your thoughts about a post-Brexit world and places like
So we're standing in an area that was largely funded from money from the European Union. The transformation of the Liverpool waterfront comes thanks to the European Union very largely. I understand entirely the question. And that's why what I was saying earlier is that you don't stop after January the 31st. What we have to do is we have to make sure that we continue to have a decent deal with the European Union. 50% of our trade is with Europe. We need to continue to remain close to the European Union, and the fight has to go on that basis. Yes, we're leaving, but we need to make sure that we get a decent deal. We need to continue as an economy and a strong economy, because only out of a strong economy can we look after people. That's what we need to be doing, and we need to be able to take the fight to, and we need somebody good at the dispatch box who will not let him wriggle and will hold him to account.
Lisa, obviously you've spoken quite a lot about sort of Northern Heartland that did go to the Tories. What about the places that didn't, and the sort of feelings that people will be feeling in places like Liverpool now?
Well, I think the challenge is the same. We're leaving the European Union with the loosest possible relationship, and we're going to seek to, as a country, do a trade deal with the US, which will put at risk not just the manufacturing, the jobs, the service industry in towns like mine, as well as cities like Liverpool. But we're also looking at defending 100 years of labour rights, the minimum wage, health and safety legislation. These things are now all at risk. But here's the opportunity. The Tories are talking about investing in the so-called red wall seats. But what they don't understand is that this was a clamour for power, agency and control. And they will never give it to people. Labour must.
Keir, obviously, in your shadow Brexit position, you have spoken about these things. What about a post-Brexit world for places like Liverpool?
Well, look, we've got to fight Boris Johnson. He's going to do great damage to our country, and we've got to be the most effective opposition in this period. It's going to be difficult to win votes, but we've got to be there taking the argument to him in Parliament, pinning him on those promises he made. We've got to take our arguments to the country and to our communities. We have got to be a very, very effective opposition in this, and we've got to be seen to be winning the arguments, and we need to translate that into wins. We've got local elections coming up in May. We have to show what we can do. We also have to address the underlying reasons why people voted to leave, and that's the thing we haven't done in the last 3 years. So effective opposition, let's take it to them, and let's get underneath this to why this all happened in the first place.
Rebecca, you're from not far from here, just down the 62. Manchester, obviously, another heavily Labour voting area, but it's somewhere like Liverpool that has relied on that funding. Can you understand why people are going to be worried with 2 weeks to go?
And they're right to be worried. And unfortunately, the Brexit referendum was the pinnacle of a 40-year iceberg. Places like Liverpool and Salford, where I'm from, were deindustrialised. And I remember when Liverpool was put into managed decline by the Conservative Party. And unfortunately, EU structural funds were the only source of funding available when we were faced with a government that didn't care about our communities. So we've got to hold the government to account on its replacement. The shared prosperity fund that they've talked about is ambiguous, and it's not clear how that will work. But we need to fight for an economy that sees investment in our deindustrialised regions and nations. And that will only happen with a socialist, aspirational, democratic economy that shifts power, economic power and political power to our regions and nations. And we should settle for nothing less than that.
Okay, so we touched on a word that a lot of people don't like to hear around here, which is Boris. And we'll move, I was sort of expecting that. So we'll start with Emily this time. And this is a simple question from Peter Nelson from Bootle. And he simply says, why are you the person to beat Boris?
I shadowed Boris Johnson for 2 years when he was Foreign Secretary. And during those 2 years, I was toe-to-toe with him, and frankly, he didn't like it. And the way I used to take him on was to be a girly swat. I'm a girly swat. I'm on top of the detail, and I would ask him questions. I'd quote things at him. He would look completely confused. I'd say, sorry, Mr. Johnson, that's what you said. He didn't even remember. We need to be able to hold him to account. He is, in the end, a liar. he is callous, he doesn't care, he plays at politics, he plays with people's lives, he needs to be held to account. We need to make sure, and frankly I think that he has a woman problem, he certainly has a problem with me, and during the 2 years when I was shadowing him, though eventually the papers came out and agreed with me that he was the single worst foreign secretary this country has ever seen, and I was part of exposing that, and I'm proud of it, and I want to take him on again as leader of the opposition, because that Prime Minister needs to be exposed.
Lisa, you've spoken about the fact that Labour needs to perhaps elect someone from the north, but of course a lot of people in the north did vote for someone called Alexander de Fifale something or whatever. So why would you be best placed to take him on at the dispatch box?
Look, I think Labour needs to elect somebody who can speak for both the north, the south, the east and the west of this country. And where they come from is secondary to whether they can do that. I've been in Parliament for 10 years now. I've shadowed, seen off lots of opposite numbers, Amber Rudd to Edward Timpson and 3 Prime Ministers as well. But I know, because I was elected in 2010, that the minute that the next leader of the Labour Party is announced, those TV cameras will turn and face the other way. The luxuries of a hung Parliament are behind us. Between 2020 and 2015, we couldn't get a hearing. The next leader has to go out into the country, make waves and empower this movement to create real change on the ground. That's what I've always done. It takes a team and it takes a movement.
And same to you, Keir.
I think it's really important that we all focus on what the task is when we're going through this election exercise. We've got to unite our party or we won't win. We've got to be an effective opposition or we won't win. And we need to forge a path to victory. That is what we've got to do. And you're going to make a decision about this. I think I've got the experience and the skills and the determination to do that. I've led a large organisation. I know how to make very difficult decisions. I think I've got the ability to bring people together in a stronger fighting force, and I've got the utter determination that we have to win the next general election. We haven't just lost one election, we've lost 4. And you don't achieve anything in opposition. We have to win the next general election, and we need to have that uppermost in our mind as we go forward from here.
And Rebecca, why are you best placed to take on?
Listen, I know why our communities are angry. I've lived through the 40 years of deindustrialisation that we've seen. And that child from Old Trafford who watched her family struggle is angry. Her life was nearly shattered, and now she's here to shatter the Tory majority. And we do that through our movement, we do that through our communities, and we do that through ambition of our principles. An aspirational socialist government that will drive through democratic reform, democratise our economy, make sure that we have an economy that shares out and reaches, and make sure that prosperity reaches every single corner of the communities that we choose to represent.
Yes, I know you've taken on Boris from the backbenches. Why do you think you should do it from the dispatch box?
I think I've managed to take on Boris Johnson from the backbenches and silence him on a number of occasions, and so would be, more than capable of doing it from the front. And what I think about some of the things that have been said about how we've taken on Boris and used detail and used our leadership is that Boris Johnson has a majority of 80, so I'm not entirely sure how successful we've been so far in doing that. We have got to start talking to people's hearts and speaking in a message and a language that people can hear and receive, because that is what Boris Johnson does. Make Brexit happen. We have got to be really careful when we think that we can have an intellectual argument when they're talking about bells, not NHS waiting times. This is a fight of our lives, and we're not even in the terrain. We have got to do something different and something bold, and Boris Johnson would be terrified to face me.
To be fair, I was a bit scared to ask you to wrap up then, so I see what you're saying. So, Emily, am I right? I'm losing track already. Is it you next? I mean,
I think I might have gone first last time.
did you go first last time? Right. This is always going to be the bit that confused me. I've tried to, when I was looking at the questions, I tried to select quite a few that I thought were quite pertinent to where we are in Liverpool, and this question is about media coverage. Obviously, Liverpool has a history of dealing with the media, and particularly in certainly strong examples. I'm not talking about when the Echo writes about Love Island, by the way, which we get plenty of abuse for, but this is a city that has been dealt a very bad hand in the past by media coverage. And Andrew Sargent wants to know, what do you think the impact of negative coverage of the Labour leader and Labour's policies in mainstream media was in the election? And how would you plan to counter the natural negative effect that much of the press will bring your way? So now we're starting with Lisa.
We're a party that seeks permission from the country to make radical change. We've never been the party of the status quo. And that means that in a country that is full of people who are decent but cautious, that we're always going to have to meet a higher bar. Before Jeremy Corbyn, there was Gordon Brown. Before Gordon Brown, there was Attlee, Wilson. Every Labour leader is going to face an onslaught. And that's why I say that we have to go out and lean into this. We cannot be afraid of taking on the media. I'm not scared of Andrew Neil. I'm happy to go into his TV studio and win that argument. And that is what Labour will do under me. The path of least resistance has never pointed towards progress. We are right. We are better. We go out. We make the argument and we win.
Keir, obviously already the press are coming after the Labour leadership candidates. How are you going to deal with it?
Well, look, the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn in that election we've just had were terrible. And they came back at us on the door. They vilified him, and they knew what they were doing, and they knew why they were doing it. And they do it to every Labour leader, and they know why they're doing it. Now, we've just lost the election, so we better prepare for the next one. And it's going to happen again, and it needs to change. We need to cut through that. This city has been wounded by the media. The Sun in this city, a hurt for this city. And I certainly won't be giving any interviews to The Sun during the course of this campaign.
And Rebecca, can I ask you the same question?
Well, I've had my fair share of smears in the last few weeks, unfortunately.
Monte Carlo, I think
but
it was, wasn't it?
Monte Carlo, yeah, exactly. But no amount of compromise with the likes of The Sun, the Daily Mail and the Telegraph will help us, because it's quite clear that there is no leader of the Labour Party who will be acceptable to those who want to destroy the Labour Party. Now, we should engage with fair journalists who want to report the facts. But for anyone else who just wants to smear us, well, sorry, I've got better things to do with my time. And we also need to be stronger at rebutting the smears and the negative campaigns that are put throughout the press, and we haven't done that adequately in the last few years. And we have to recognise the role of social media. The Conservatives ran a very slick campaign on social media, on Twitter. It was quite insidious, if I'm honest, and we need to match that, and we need to be ready to fight on social media by upping our resources as a party.
I have to ask you to wrap up there, Rebecca. Yes?
I think, as everyone has said, we need to be mindful that nobody is going to get a fair hearing. The amount of emails about hilarious things, ridiculous things that I have had since I entered into this race that have no bearing on anybody's politics, that have anything to do with this contest or people's lives is ridiculous. I was asked to hold a bacon sandwich in a photo the other day, so every Labour I refused. Every Labour leader gets taken down. But we have also got to look at what is happening on social media. We have got to be much, much tougher on the fake news, because the Tories put out an advert during the last election that was a direct lie about me, and it spread far and wide. So if we're going to tackle how we're treated in the media, we're going to have to democratise some of the stuff that goes on social media and have proper regulation for that as well.
Thanks, Jess. Emily, I guess part of the question here as well was how much of an impact you think it had on the result, and then what you would also do about it.
So look, being leader of the Labour Party when you're in opposition is quite frankly the worst job in the world. That's what we're all applying for. And in the end, we have to wade through an awful lot of shit you know, and we will get it thrown at us. Of course we will. And the reason they'll do it is because we're the main message carrier for the Labour Party, and there are many vested interests in this country who find us scary. Because we want fundamental change and we want to have our country better and fairer, and we will keep pushing for it, and we're not going to give up. So the way they do it is they try and come for us. Now, during the 15 years I've been in Parliament, I've done 7 frontbench jobs. I've spent 4 years loyal to Jeremy Corbyn, and I can tell you that the Daily Mail have been employing people full-time, trying to cut me off at the knees. I've had a whole van load of Sun journalists turn up at my house at one stage. So I am battle-hardened. They have got everything they possibly can on me, and I'm afraid I have a boring life. There's nothing else they can do. But I'm quite sure that they'll have a good go. And I'll tell you what, if they do, if it works, and I don't think it will, I can promise you now that if we're going into a general election, I'm a drag on the ticket, because of the smears, I would stand down, because I will never get in the way of a Labour victory, because that is what this is about.
Thank you. Now, it's starting to creep over the time there, so I won't be getting too shirty, but I'll have let security know if it happens again, all right? So, Lisa, we've done that one already. We've come as far as you. I'm really losing track of the order here. We're going to move on to a question from Kieran Proudfoot. He's from St Helens and Wiston, and he says, how do you plan on rebuilding the red wall that Labour lost in the general election? So we're starting with Keir on this one.
Well, we have to win back in the Midlands and the North those seats that we lost. And we need to identify and address every reason that we lost. And we need to celebrate what's in our towns as well. In all the towns that I've gone to, there's an incredible pride. There are businesses thriving there. There are community spirits there. And we need to nurture that. We need to champion our towns. But we need to remember that if all we do is win back our red wall seats, we're going to lose the next general election. If all we do is get back to where we were, we will lose. We need to win in Scotland, we need to win in Wales, we need to win in the southwest and the southeast. That is the scale of the task. We will do that by listening and addressing. And I don't think it matters where you come from. In all the conversations I've had across the whole of the United Kingdom,
To wrap up there, Keir.
nobody has ever said to me, you're a Londoner. They said, you've come to me to talk and have a discussion, you're decent about it, and I trust you.
40 seconds, guys, come on. Rebecca, can you get us back to our 40-second limit, please, and talk about the red wall?
I'll try. I think we've got to recognise that despite having manifesto policies that answered many of the questions that needed to be asked, we didn't really get our messaging right in this election campaign. And many thought that we were offering handouts rather than empowering them to better their own lives. And that's why I think we need to start talking about aspiration, because socialism is aspiration. It's what we believe in. And we believe in the government's role being the betterment of its people, and that should go to the heart of our messages to our community. And we can do that through our green industrial revolution. We can do that through democratising our economy, through alternative models of ownership, and making sure that workers and communities have a real stake in their future. And we can do that by making sure that political power shifts away from Westminster, sweeping away things like the House of Lords and replacing it with an elected Senate that represents our regions and nations.
So I knocked doors, in fact, with a baby who was in utero in this audience, in parts of the Red Wall. It's the first time I've seen this baby since we were knocking doors together. And everywhere was the same stories, that people didn't trust us to deliver for their families. They didn't think that we could do the thing that we said we were going to do. And the fundamental thing is that we weren't very optimistic. We weren't talking about how people's lives could be better. We were often just talking about how they were bad. And we need to be really optimistic, but we also really need to understand that the basics are the things that people talk to us about on the doorstep, their caring roles, their houses, how safe they feel with their kids. We've got to speak in the language that people speak on in the doorsteps, because no one talks about federalism or wanting this Senate or that Senate. We've got to start talking like people actually talk about the things that they actually talk about.
Thank you, Jess. Emily, you're a London MP. How can you reconnect with the
So in the last couple of years, I've did a tally. I've visited 137 constituencies up and down the country. And during that time, I've been listening to people, and what I have heard is that we needed to have a manifesto that was drawn up on the basis of the needs of towns and smaller cities, because actually that is where elections are won and lost. But it's also the area where there is the greatest need, whether that is dealing with deindustrialisation, whether that's the hollowing out of our high streets. You know, you're absolutely right to be raising this, and it is absolutely what I have heard. But the other thing that I have heard is that what the country's crying out for is a credible and competent opposition that they can believe in, so that when we say there is another way, it does not have to be this way, they believe that we can deliver. That's what we need as a country.
And finally, Lisa, I know this is something you spoke about before. What is your big plan for bringing back the Red Wall?
Feeling that base collapse beneath our feet on election night was shattering, but our task is bigger than rebuilding the Red Wall. We've got to build the Red Bridge that stretches from Lewisham to Lee and enables us to speak for very different parts of Britain again. We're a movement that was built by, not just for, working class people, and we need to rediscover that. We do not know better than people in other parts of the country what they need, what resources they need, what assets and potential that they have. And that's why I say that we need to shift the centre of gravity in the UK so that decision-making power is much closer to home. And it starts with Labour, empowering our regional conferences to make policy, giving our CLPs real power and resource to make change in their communities, and moving Labour HQ out of central London as a powerful symbol of change.
So I'm just going to spice things up slightly and say that we have MPs from the North and from London on these podiums, and from the Midlands. Sorry, and from the Midlands. It's north of the Watford Gap, right? Yeah. So there has been plenty said already that the leader needs to be from the North, and that maybe it shouldn't be someone from London, and vice versa. So I'm just going to start again with Keir. You are from a London MP. Is that going to hold you back in the north of England?
Well, look, I've actually talked to thousands of people in the last 3.5 years. I've gone very much to places that voted Leave because I wanted those difficult discussions. I've gone into community centres, business places, working man's clubs, you name it. We've had really blunt conversations, a lot of fun, a lot of jokes and all the rest of it. And in all of that, no one person has ever said to me, you're a Londoner. I don't think this is, they want to say, what have you got to say? Not where are you from? Not one person has said you're a Londoner. They said you've had the decency to come to my town, to where I sit, where I have my coffee, where I have my lunch, and have a conversation with me. And I've always said to them at the end of that, just tell me 3 or 4 things for the train on the way home. And they said we need infrastructure, we need decent jobs, and we need power. We want to make decisions for ourselves about what happens in our town. Nobody but nobody has ever raised the question of where you're from. If you're decent enough to come and have a conversation, people are decent enough to give you a hearing, in my view.
Rebecca, you're a proud Northerner. Does the next leader need to be from the North?
Well, obviously I'm biased and I'd say yes, but I think it's about your principles, but it certainly helps, and it certainly helps having grown up and lived in an area that has been affected and has become quite angry about the centralisation of political and financial power in London and the South East, and to ensure that we provide a vision to our communities who were angry with us and didn't trust us in this general election. We've got to have someone that understands that can tell them quite clearly that they will shift power and wealth to regions and nations, so that all of the decisions that affect all of our lives aren't made by an elite in Westminster, they're made by the communities themselves. That needs to be our message to our communities, because as Nye Bevan has said, the whole point of power and gaining power is to be able to give it away, and that's what the Labour Party needs to do.
Jess, did you say not quite the North, but certainly you're from outside of London?
I'm from outside.
Does that give you a better perspective?
The Midlands, where we lost absolutely you know, just as many seats as were lost in our northern regions. Look, you know, maybe people are different in Birmingham and people were different on the doorsteps that I knocked, but nobody actually asked me that they wanted power, they wanted decent services, and they wanted their councils to be able to afford to deliver their decent services. I don't think it matters. I think it's patronising to working class people or to people who don't live in London to think that they can't understand somebody who's from London. They just voted for Boris Johnson. What I would say about what we need to do to reach people is actually have the same life experiences as them. So for me to stand opposite Boris Johnson, it's not just in my childhood that this man and his government has affected my life. My son literally cannot go to school 5 days a week. My brother is on universal credit. We need someone who can stand opposite Boris Johnson and wear his government in his face.
Thanks, Jess. Emily, fighting the flag for the London side of things, do you think you have enough experience to connect with people all across the country?
So I launched my campaign yesterday in Guildford, and people went, what? I said, well, actually, I launched it on Belfields, and that was the council estate that I was brought up on. And in my ward, there is 30% of the children are under the poverty line. So please don't come it to me. You know, don't make assumptions about who is who from what region. I think that is deeply patronising. It's deeply patronising about the South East to say that they're all millionaires and they all drive around in posh cars. And it's deeply patronising to say that to make all sorts of, you know, ridiculous sweeping statements about the North East. But I'll tell you this. Struggle is struggle, and powerlessness is powerlessness. And not just the Tories have overlooked many of these areas, Labour governments overlooked them too. And what we allowed was for deindustrialisation to happen and for nothing to be done about it. Yes, money was invested in hospitals and schools, but nothing was done about the infrastructure in the way that it should have been done, and nothing was done about finding alternative jobs in the way it should have been done in order to make sure that we could stick together as one country. We need to have somebody who can speak on behalf of the whole country. If you come from one bit of the country, you don't come from another bit. It's self-evident.
Okay, thank you.
Clement Attlee was the best Prime Minister we ever had. And where did he come from? Limehouse.
And Lisa, does being rooted in our northern communities mean being from those northern communities?
Well, I agree with Jess that I think the next Labour leader needs to show that they've got skin in the game and that they live the same lives and they speak the same language as the people we seek to represent. But I know that the people I represented in Hammersmith as a councillor were just as shut out from power as the people that I represent in Wigan. And actually, one of the things that's broken apart our movement is the fact that we've lost the ability to understand one another. When people in Hammersmith call for a green revolution, people in Wigan fear that their jobs are going and their energy bill is going up. But that green revolution, if we get this right, it means better buses, it means home insulation to reduce energy bills, and it means those clean energy jobs that will bring a sense of purpose back after 40 years of economic decline. We've got to up our game, we've got to recover our ambition. We are a national party that seeks to govern in the national interest, and we have to speak for both.
Okay, we had a lot of questions on one particular topic, and they were quite often weighted in a certain direction and expressed quite a lot of opinions, so the group of us behind decided to sort of condense it into a very generalised question on this issue. And it concerns the pledges of the Board of Deputies that you guys have signed up to. So I'd like to just ask you why you decided to do that, and what you make of some of the perhaps response to you doing that. Becky, should we start with you?
I think certainly my experiences in Salford, some of our Salford members were absolutely devastated in the election when they were faced with members of the Jewish community who said that they didn't trust our party anymore. And ours is the party of the Lever brothers, of Ralph Miliband, and we can never let that level of mistrust happen again. And that requires looking within and seeing what went wrong. And we weren't dealing with the issue effectively. We weren't responding to complaints quickly enough. And despite the work that was done by our National Executive Committee to speed up processes, that trust was still a huge issue. So I've signed up to the Board of Deputy Pledges because I don't have a problem with any of them. I agree with many of the principles. I've been calling for an independent process to deal with anti-Semitism, but not just anti-Semitism, all forms of discrimination and racism within our party, so that we have the gold standard when it comes to dealing with issues of this nature. And I also think there's a huge question about education within our party. It's about making sure that the conspiracy theories and the slurs that have happened in recent years don't happen, and that we feel comfortable as members to talk about political issues across the world without offending or being anti-Semitic.
Thank you.
And that's why I want to work with the Jewish Labour movement and the Jewish community to make sure that we really reset this and start to build faith in the Labour Party again.
It's a complicated issue, so I don't know if I'm going to regret this later, but I'm happy to let you go on a little bit on this one, guys, like Rebecca did there. So, Jess, what about yourself? Why did you sign?
So, the Labour Party needs a leader who has spoken out against anti-Semitism and other forms of harassment, in fact, when others were keeping quiet, and somebody who was in the room struggling for an independent system, lots and lots of meetings. I have to say, I don't remember some of the people here being in that particular room or being in those particular fights when we were really pushing for this to change. Jewish people were scared of the Labour Party winning the election. That is deeply serious. The Labour Party has now lost the credibility to handle its own complaint system. And so it has to sign up to not just what the Board of Deputies is saying, but also what the Jewish Labour movement have been asking for in independent scrutiny for a long, long time. Because not only do we owe it to our Jewish members, our Jewish founders, our Jewish groups, and all the Jewish allies, we have lost the moral high ground to fight racism in this country because of the way that we have handled anti-Semitism.
Same question to you, Emily.
The problem, anti-Semitism is a problem for society as a whole, and it's also a problem for the Labour Party. But it's a particular problem for the Labour Party because of our history and because of our values. We hold ourselves to a higher standard, and we must do, and we always should. And I remember just 2 years ago in the main hall at party conference, I made this point, which is you must be critical of the far-right government of Netanyahu and what that far-right government is doing to Palestine. You must stand up and you must make it clear that what the Israeli government is doing at the moment is completely unacceptable. But that is not the fault of the Jews. And once you start linking those two things together, you misunderstand. And that's where racism begins. And we have to stand up to it and we have to be clear. And I tell you what, Jess, I have always been clear about it and I always will. Because it is unacceptable. It undermines us as a party. It undermines our soul. And what we should be doing is kicking out these anti-Semites in the same way that Oswald Mosley was kicked out of Liverpool in 1937.
Thank you, Emily. The same question to you, Lisa, regarding the Board of Deputies.
Look, I'm ashamed of where our party has ended up. We failed to deal with, perhaps refused to deal with, very high-profile cases of anti-Semitism, and in doing so we gave the green light to anti-Semites that they were welcome in our party. And I never ever want to see again the sight that I saw at the Parliamentary Labour Party, a group of Jewish MPs begging the party to adopt an internationally recognised definition of anti-Semitism, and the response that came from the top table was, "We know better than you what constitutes anti-Semitism." And I'm someone who's been Vice Chair and Chair of Labour Friends of Palestine in the Middle East for 7 years now, and so I know that a lot of members are worried that that would mean that they couldn't speak out, but I'll tell you this, it is perfectly possible to fight for the recognition of Palestine and to defend the right of Israel to exist. It is not complicated. And I say, never again do I want to be door-knocking with members of this party, my party, who have driven the far right out of Wigan over and over again for decades. We saw off Tommy Robinson last year, and when he comes back to town, we'll see him off again and be called racist on the doorstep. The collective failure of leadership at the top of this party has let us all down. It's let the Jewish community in this country down, and this is existential for the Labour Party. We cannot go out and claim to be creating a more equal, a fairer, a more compassionate society unless we get our own house in order, and that starts with these pledges, and that starts right now.
Keir, you've been part of that shadow cabinet. How do you feel about the way that the Labour Party is?
Look, it's quite possible to criticise Israeli policies without being anti-Semitic, and we should do so, and we should be proud to do so. But the other bit is simple. If you're anti-Semitic, you shouldn't be in the Labour Party. It's as simple as that. And I would take a personal lead on this from the top. Because unless the person at the top takes that personal lead, things won't change. I would require a report every week on my desk, knowing exactly what is happening. And I have spoken out. I've spoken out on the radio, on the media. I've spoken out about rule changes I thought we should adopt, about the international definition of anti-Semitism, and urged our party to make changes. I've also made those arguments in shadow cabinet, as Emily and others have done as well. So don't think there hasn't been an argument about this, but I've changed my mind on whether the test is whether we change our rules. The test I now adopt and would adopt as leader of our party is, I will only be satisfied that we have adequately dealt with this when everybody who left our party because of anti-Semitism feels comfortable to return to it. That's my test. And I never want anyone in this room or our party ever to knock on a door again and be met by the response, we've always voted Labour, but we're not doing it because of anti-Semitism. Never, ever again.
Okay, so we are now returning to the strict 40-second rule, okay? That was just a one-off. We've got a question about the manifesto, and I'm going to add a sort of pop quiz question on the end. So this is about, it's saying which of the policies in the manifesto would you most want to keep? And then I'm going to ask you to just add at the end, which do you think was the most difficult policy to sell on the doorstep? So we're starting with Jess.
Okay. I think that there were a couple of crucial things that were missing from our manifesto. I think it wasn't strong enough on crime and security, and that is what I heard on the doorstep, that people wanted to hear exactly how we were going to make them feel safe. There were areas where we had absolutely the right policy, the green industrial revolution, but we failed to make the arguments. It felt sometimes like our manifesto was a million promises but no arguments made. And if I'm completely honest, the priorities seemed wrong, and I was literally laughed at on the school run about the broadband policy and had no idea quite how many BT Openreach people lived in my constituency until we had that policy. So I do just feel that that was the wrong priority. When people can't afford to get to the end of the month, they think a government offering them free broadband is a bit wrong.
Okay, so that's one for broadband. Emily, what worked and what didn't?
The problem that we had was that we were so ambitious. I mean, our programme was a 15-year programme, as far as I could see. And I'd been to Australia and spoken to the Australian Labour Party, where they had lost the election, and they had done the same thing. Their manifesto was too broad, too ambitious, and frankly, people were confused. There were 4 or 5 policies coming out a day, and I couldn't keep up with them, let alone our poor activists who were having to try to sell it on the doorstep. We need to be clear and have priorities. I don't think, actually, if I look at the manifesto, there's anything I disagree with. The trouble was that there was too much in it, and that comes back to being believable. What were our priorities? We needed, I don't want to go back to the 1990s, apart from maybe winning some elections, but what we should be doing is having pledge cards with 5 pledges on where we are clear about what our priorities are. And that's, I don't have the time to go through them.
Did you select the worst one?
I can select you the best ones. I really like social care. We have got to do something about social care. We have got to do something about social care. It's all very well of standing up for the National Health Service, but if we allow people who are disabled to be stuck at home and not even bathed in the morning, what kind of country are we? And we need to get that argument out there. We need to do something about it.
Okay. Lisa, what worked for you in the manifesto and what didn't?
Well, I think we need to rediscover the language of priorities, and I think we've vastly underestimated the need that many people around this country feel for just basic security in their own lives. As one woman said to me, it's our money, love, we haven't got a lot of it. And I think we need to go back to a time when we were making deep, fundamental, radical change in a way that didn't frighten people. The minimum wage, which my predecessor Ian McCartney was responsible for, was one of the best examples of empowering socialism in action. But my socialism really is about enabling people to live more dignified, richer, larger lives. And I have to say that the failure, not just in this manifesto, but in 3 manifestos running to tackle basic questions about social security and putting money back into people's pockets and building a social security system fit for the 21st century, that has got to be part of the Labour vision. It's really.
At least, Lisa, just in one word, was there something you struggled to sell on the doorstep particularly?
I struggled to sell the package.
The
I think people just really didn't trust us. They wanted to see deep fundamental change. They don't want to go back to the time when we were promising £3 off your energy bill, and by the way, we'll be pretty nasty to immigrants as well. Nobody wants to go back there, but they need to trust us to deliver that radical change.
Thank you. And Keir, where do you stand on the manifesto?
Well, look, we're at a turning point, aren't we? We've got to decide where we go from here, and that's why we're talking about the manifesto. My rules would be, don't trash the last Labour government. Don't trash the last Labour government. And don't trash the last 4 years. Because what Jeremy Corbyn brought to this party, he made us an anti-austerity party that stood against cuts, a party that wanted to invest in public services, the party of the Green New Deal. And that was in our manifesto. And we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater here as we go forward. There's no going back on this. The problem with the manifesto was it was overloaded. It was overloaded. People didn't say to me, I don't like what's in it. They said, I can't take it in. And there's a tipping point. There's a tipping point where people say, I just don't believe it. And once you've passed that point, there's no way back. What I want to do now is focus on the next manifesto, because that's the manifesto where we have to capture that radicalism and make it relevant for the 2020s and the 2030s. And Labour wins when it's able to spell out the future and have hope, and people say, I trust you to do it.
Thank you, Keir. Rebecca, I know you've spoken again about the Green New Deal being a fundamental part of your leadership bid. Was there anything in what the others are saying in an overloaded manifesto?
Well, I was really proud of many of the policies in our manifesto. I know because I've been locked in a room for the last 4 years writing many of those policies. The Green Industrial Revolution was one of them. Economic reform, democratising forms of ownership and industrial strategy. All things that would have transformed lives in our heartlands that lost trust with us. But we didn't have that message, that shining conviction that unites us all, that our children's lives should be better than our own. That's what that manifesto would have delivered, but we hadn't convinced people of that, and we need to have that aspirational socialist message. The second point was about the longer programme. There were many things within the manifesto that we were going to do as part of a longer-term programme. The 4-day working week was one example. As a movement, we are working towards shorter working hours. We've got some of the most stressful working conditions in the whole of Europe, but that would have come after we'd improved productivity with a real industrial strategy. It would have happened after we'd strengthened the role of trade unions in our workplaces, and we didn't explain that to people, and we saw the press fall out from that.
Thank you very much. I hope you guys can remember who's next, because I definitely can't. Emily, thank you. Right, we talked about the Green New Deal there. There's a question. I should say that last question was from Alison Sendall in Delyn. Thank you very much. This question is Jessica Makin in Cardiff. Come all the way from Cardiff. Can we get a cheer for that? Woo! So I seem to have turned into a sort of chat show host at some point. This is a question about a crucial issue, and 40 seconds is obviously no time at all, but if you can stick to it. we want to know what you're going to do to propose with the current climate crisis.
Okay. First of all, we can't solve the climate crisis on our own. Carbon created in Grimsby is just as toxic for us as carbon created in Gabon. And we need, therefore, to have a Green New Deal which is internationalised. We need to make sure that we globalise it and that every country is able to harness its natural resources and move towards a zero-carbon economy. It seems to me that we can take a leadership in this, and we must take a leadership in this. We created the first industrial revolution. We can do the green industrial revolution. We can take a lead if we're bold and brave and look to the future.
That was good. I had 5 seconds to spare as well.
Hey.
Yeah.
Going to go again?
I might be able to get over to Wetherspoons for lunch. No, sorry, not Wetherspoons. There's some great independent craft bars around here. I'll go there instead. Lisa, where do you stand on tackling the climate crisis?
First of all, we've got to stop dividing people. People in my constituency in Wigan care just as much about tackling climate change as people do in any other part of the country. And it takes a movement to deliver that real change on the ground. But when I was serving as the Shadow Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, one of the privileges of my life, I went over to see what they'd done in Silicon Valley, where they'd used the powers that they had on the ground to drive investment by providing tax breaks and bringing in some of the toughest environmental standards in the world. Because of that, their young people are designing the clean energy of the future, and ours are assembling solar panels for the minimum wage. Never, ever again must we allow that to happen. We need to bring these jobs to Britain with the investment that we need and empower a movement in communities across this country to take on the climate crisis and solve it once and for all.
And Keir, where do you stand on Labour's approach to the climate emergency?
At the end of the Second World War, the world came together and said never again. And they came together, they agreed binding standards on human rights and forms of accountability that have changed the world and inspired me throughout my life. We now need to do the same again because this is a global issue. We need the world to come together in that same spirit and say, how do we now devise standards and binding requirements and accountability? And we don't have it at the moment. The international instruments aren't strong enough, but we need to lead on that. We need to be the country that's out there making that argument. There are good things in our manifesto. There are things we can do in this country, but we can't do this unless it's a global lead. We need to get to that moment that is the equivalent of what happened after the Second World War, where the world says we cannot go on like this, and we're going to change it.
Thank you, Keir.
I haven't a clue.
Rebecca, you were instrumental in the creation of the Green New Deal. Is that the way forward for the Labour Party?
It is. We have to tackle the climate crisis, and the sad fact is we are running out of time. But the Green New Deal, the Green Industrial Revolution we were calling it, it was the biggest economic lever we have seen in a generation to transform the economic futures of our communities. Whether it was tidal power here in Merseyside, offshore and onshore wind, whether it was solar panels on top of schools and public buildings and homes, whether it was insulating every single home across the UK and ushering in what I've called a new era of public luxury. This was our NHS moment. It was our chance to deliver to the world something positive, as well as building the industries of the future to give our communities pride. And I'll never stop fighting for that. From someone who suffered from deindustrialisation, I know how much pride in our industries and our communities is to many of the people that I represent, and I'll fight for their future on this basis.
Jess, if you've obviously been somewhat critical of the manifesto, where did you stand on the Green?
Well, the one thing I said I was absolutely keen on was the Green New Deal. The single greatest threat facing us in this country and across the world is the climate crisis. And we have to try and never waste a crisis, my mum used to say. So we have to try and turn that crisis into a genuine opportunity. And I speak as somebody who most of my constituents work at either the airport or in a car factory. And so we have got to make sure that, as Lisa said, we are investing in making sure that all of the battery tech, all of the levers that we can possibly pull are providing jobs so that people where I live, people in Ellesmere Port, can get behind this issue too. Because do you know what we should be saying to people as a mother of 2 sons, both with inhalers, is this is our children's lungs, this is our children's lives, but we have got to make sure that we don't leave people economically unviable in the changes that we make, and we can only do that through investment.
Okay, so just to let everyone know that we've got one question left, and then we will go to a 2-minute sort of finale from each of you, starting in the order that you went with. We decided to go for a sort of personal question to end things with. Thank you very much, by the way, everyone, for taking part, and thank you, everyone, for sending in your questions. So many good questions, some slightly obscure ones, but mainly very good. Yeah. This one is a simple one, and so we're going to start with Lisa on this one, and it's what keeps you awake at night?
What keeps me awake at night is where this country's going. I was born in 1979, the year that Thatcher came to power. Everything that I see on the streets of Britain, the rough sleeping, the ambulances backed up outside hospitals, the collapse of our public services, the unemployment, everything is just so achingly, heartbreakingly familiar. And I have a young child. I do not want him to be 17 like I was before he sees his first Labour government. That's what keeps me awake at night. That is why I say that this party must up its game, recover our ambition, and go out and fight for the Britain we know we can be.
Keir, what's on your mind at night?
The frustration of opposition. I've never known a time when we so needed a radical Labour government. Inequality is everywhere, whichever way you measure it. Income, wealth, health, influence, massive inequality after 10 years of Tory rule, and we're in opposition. When I came into politics, like you did, to change lives, to change things for the better for millions of people. And we can't do that in opposition. And that's why we need to rebuild, why we need to unite, to be that effective opposition and find our way to victory. And I want to lead not just our party, but our country, and I want to be proud of the Labour Party in tackling those inequalities, restoring our faith and hope for millions of people in this country who desperately, desperately need change.
I should say this question is from Claire McIntyre, who's a Liverpool councillor here. She wants to know what keeps you awake at night, Rebecca.
Well, apart from my husband Steve snoring, and I have to jab him quite a lot, it's inequality and the climate crisis, and the fact that we've got a Conservative government that has washed its hands of our people, and it's washed its hands of its responsibility to deliver a planet that our children can live on. And our job, and this is another thing that keeps me awake at night, is how we act as the salespeople for socialism. How do we show people that everything that we believe in this room is sensible, credible, and will transform our economy? Because what we're talking about is being done in other European countries, and they're not calling it far left or crazy. It's what a civilised society expects. And I want to be the leader that gets that aspirational message through to our communities.
My missus is right with you on that snoring issue. It's causing chaos. Jess, what keeps you awake at night apart from snoring?
It's actually me that snores, so my husband keeps me awake trying to wake me up. I ran refugees and rape crisis accommodation and before I was a Member of Parliament, so I've seen some horrendous and harrowing things in my life. And you get sort of battle weary. The hardest thing in those circumstances is trying to convince people that the reason that that sort of crime happens to people is because of inequalities in society. Because some people are harder to see, some people are harder to care for. The thing that keeps me awake at night is that a constituent of mine who had to be rehoused in a situation not dissimilar to that of violence, where we had helped hugely to rehouse them, fight against every bit of the welfare system that is currently wrong, on election day said, I like that Boris Johnson, I think I'll vote for him. That
Thank
is
you very
what
much, Jess.
terrifies me, is we are currently not reaching the people who desperately need us.
Thank you. Emily, what are the biggest concerns that play on your mind at night?
I joined the Labour Party because, for me, it was going to be the only vehicle for social change, for progressive social change. I joined the Labour Party because of my own experiences of unfairness and inequality. We were chucked out of our house when I was 7. The bailiffs came round, and we ended up, thanks to a Labour councillor, being put onto a council estate out at Belfields, and my mum got benefits. I wanted us, frankly, over those 50 years to have been getting into a better place, not into a worse place. But I have people coming to my constituency. I have mothers who are about to lose their homes in the way that my mum was about to lose her home, and I am not in a position to be able to help her. And I won't be in a position to be able to help her unless we win the next election. And where is the Labour Party going? Are we going to be a fighting machine that will win the next election? Because it must never, ever happen again. We have got to win next time and be serious about it and have a leader who can be the chief campaigner and who will be out there taking it to Boris Johnson. And that's what I'm going to do.
Okay, so I don't want the candidates to get too excited now, but the clock is going to expand to 2 minutes. Look, there you go. Fun and games. So we've got 2 minutes each from each candidate, starting with Rebecca, finishing with Keir. We want you to just set out your final pledges to this great crowd here as why you should be elected as the next leader of the Labour Party. Thank you, Rebecca.
Well, I never expected to be standing here. I grew up in a working class family in Manchester. I learnt my politics sitting at the top of our stairs, listening to my dad talking about pay disputes, the union and redundancies. I learnt my politics working in a pawn shop, that's P-A-W-N, by the way. And that was after 18 years of Tory rule. And my God, you could see what it means when the government really washes its hands of the people. But what's happened over the last decade has been absolutely soul-destroying. And that's what makes the defeat in the general election all the more harder to take. We shouldn't be under any illusions about the scale of the defeat or the scale of the challenge ahead of us, but we can't afford to be despondent. The crisis we face in our climate, in our public services starved of funding, in a broken economy and with a resurgent right-wing populism all demand a response, and we urgently have to rebuild. Now, I'm standing for leader because I believe we can do so. We can connect all parts of our country with a promise of a new socialist economy with a green industrial revolution. We must promise a radical transfer of democratic power out of London, ending the Gentlemen's Club of Westminster. We must empower our members, our biggest asset, to have a greater voice in our party. And we win by becoming a year-round campaigning force in every community throughout the country. Now, we've got a saying in Salford, the welfare of the people is the highest law, and I believe in that. That's my vision, that's the Labour Party I believe in, and that will be our path to power.
Thank you very much. And Jess, to close your 2 minutes.
So we have to make a choice, and we could take what might look like the safe option and face 10 more years of opposition. One more heave is not going to work. Or we could be bold and get back into power in 5. We all know how much Labour governments change lives. When I had my first son at 23, I couldn't have managed, I certainly wouldn't be standing here without the help of tax credits or Sure Start centres. Everything great that we have ever done, everything that makes us have that warm, fuzzy Labour Party feeling, from the NHS to debt relief in the poorest parts of the world, has been achieved after winning an election. And when we win elections, we offer optimistic visions for the future that people can actually believe in. To win, We have to be a big and diverse group of people, and all of us need to help shape that Labour Party policy together, because we are all members of the Labour Party, no matter what brand others give us. It starts with speaking truth and being true to our values. I want to lead a party that unreservedly celebrates immigration, that provides cradle-to-grave care for everyone, that never turns our back on Europe, that leads the world on tackling the climate crisis, and that stands in solidarity with everyone struggling for justice and dignity, wherever they may be, town, country, city, anywhere. We know Boris Johnson is scared of what he doesn't understand. Well, let me tell you, he literally can't understand what I'm saying sometimes. He doesn't understand women like me, and he doesn't understand the power of our movement. So let's not play it safe. Let's be interesting. Let's reach out. Let's fight. Let's speak truth. And we can win. Thank you.
Emily, why should you be elected as Labour leader?
It's great to be back in Liverpool. Thank you all for being here. And we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we, today? We've shown that we can have the kind of civil discourse that, frankly, we ought to be having in the Labour Party, even when we disagree. And I hope that that lesson is sent out to our various supporters on Twitter. We can but hope. For me, this leadership campaign should not be about who's going to take us to the left, who's going to take us to the right, who's going to take us to the centre. We have to look at who's going to take us forward, and who's going to take us forward and take the fight to Boris Johnson. And that's why I put myself forward for this leadership, because I'm the only one of us that has gone toe-to-toe with Boris Johnson over 2 years at the dispatch box when he was Foreign Secretary. I got under his skin, I exposed him for what he was, which is a reckless, lying charlatan. And make no mistake, it's going to be a long, hard fight. And so that's the other reason that I'm standing here today, is because I believe that you need a battle-hardened, experienced, strong and resilient campaigner who's going to lead this fight. And that's what I believe I am. I think I may have said I'm a tough old bird. And ever since I've started, when I was 17, I was going around collecting subs for the Labour Party, and for the last 42 years, I have been in the party, and I've been representing Labour values. I represented the miners in the 1980s. I marched against the Iraq War. I stood up in Parliament demanding justice for Palestine and Yemen. I've been at the front of all of that campaigning that we've ever done together. And I'm standing here to lead the party because I want to be the woman who leads the fight back against Boris Johnson. I want to be the campaigner-in-chief. I believe that we can do it, but we have to do it together. We all need to be together in this fight. So together, let's stand up straight, and let's start the fight back.
Lisa, can we have 2 minutes from yourself, please?
For 15 years, we've been doing the same thing. We've changed the man at the top and hoped it would solve our problems. It won't. Defeated in Scotland, beaten back in North Wales, the North, the South and the Midlands, we have to go out, make waves, emotionally reconnect and show we have as much riding on this as the people we once represented. Some people in this party say just pick a side. I say that's defeatist. We build the red bridge, not the red wall. Why shouldn't we stand for the people I once represented in Hammersmith and the people I now represent in Wigan? Why not be the party of the migrant children who inspired me into national politics and the veterans I now defend against this heartless Tory government? Now is not the time to steady the ship. Now is the time to raise our game. In every battle that I've ever fought, I've learned that in moments of danger, you run towards trouble. You get out to the country, you take on those arguments. Unlike Boris Johnson, we're not scared of a fight, we're not scared of a challenge, and under my leadership, we will never shy away from that fight. The path of least resistance never ever points towards progress. But to do that, we have to empower our movement. We may be in power, but we're not powerless. And it doesn't start in 2024. It doesn't even start on April the 4th. It starts right now now with every single person in this room. The road back is steep, but it doesn't have to be long. Now, I know there's never been a leader who looks or sounds like me, but across the world, from Finland to New Zealand, it is happening. We need a different sort of leadership, one that can build a team and inspire a movement, and that takes a different sort of leader. So I'm asking for your permission to lead us back into power as your next Labour Prime Minister, so we can become the country I've always believed in, but I've never seen. Today is the day we begin. It's been a shattering defeat, but I can see that country. I feel I can almost touch it. So it starts today. It starts with all of us. We go out, we take the fight, and we win together.
Finally, Keir, why should people vote for you?
I've spent my life fighting injustice, from pit closures and the Iraq War to the death penalty across the world and domestic violence. I've never walked past an injustice. And as we look around us now at the docks out there and the Liverpool skyline, I see a city transformed. But go down to street level, and we have to question who's benefiting from that transformation. Rising homelessness, people trapped in low pay, global corporations paying next to no tax. I don't believe that that is inevitable. I think another future is possible, but only if we fight for it. We think it's daunting. The result was devastating. It seems impossible from here. The Tories can't contain themselves down in Westminster. But we can stop them, and we can beat them. When our movement is united, it is unstoppable. From the rubble of the Second World War, the Attlee government built a country that was different forever. Our history, Labour history, the history of working people in Liverpool is proof that we can make the impossible possible. We need to make that the story of our future, not just our past. I never want a night like the 12th of December last year ever again for our party and our movement. I think we can win, and I want to lead our party and our country to a better future. And with your support, I think I can do that.
Amazingly, considering there's 5 politicians on the stage, we finished on time, which is remarkable. Well done, guys. Thank you for your succinct answers. What I would say is it'd be great if everybody could join us after the lunch break for the equally important Deputy Leader Hustings, which are, of course, really crucial. They're going to be back in here at 3. So you've got an hour. Go and buy a Liverpool Echo. Keep me in a job. That'd be great. There's no chance. I knew that was coming. Can I just have a final round of applause for our excellent candidates?